You know, they are the silent architects of our world, the very foundation of nearly all life on Earth. So today, we're going to trace the incredible 450 million year story of how plants went from simple life in the water to the complex, dominant forms we see all over the planet. Let's dive right into this epic journey. It seems like a simple question, doesn't it? I mean, we see them every day, but what are the actual ground rules? What's the fundamental blueprint that connects, say, a tiny little alga with a giant redwood tree? Before we can get into how they changed, we really need to understand what they are at their core. And just to give you a sense of the scale we're talking about, get this. Scientists have identified around 380,000 known species of plants. That incredible diversity is a result of a series of absolutely brilliant evolutionary innovations that let them solve one massive challenge after another. Okay, so let's start by locking down that basic design. What are the key characteristics that define every member of the plant kingdom? First up, the official definition. At their most basic, plants are multicellular eukaryotes. Now, all that means is that their cells have a nucleus and other complex bits and pieces inside. They're also generally non-modal, anchored in place. And their cells are protected by this really strong, rigid wall made of cellulose. That's what gives them all that structural support. And right here, this is their superpower, photosynthesis. Plants are autotrophs, which is just a fancy way of saying they make their own food. Using chlorophyll, they literally harness sunlight to turn carbon dioxide and water into sugar for energy. And the byproduct? Oh, just the oxygen that most of life, including us, needs to survive. This process is the engine that drives pretty much every ecosystem on Earth. All right, our story really kicks off in the water. For millions and millions of years, plant life was totally confined to oceans and freshwater. So the first great challenge, the first major plot twist in our story, was that monumental leap on a dry land. To get a handle on this journey, we can just follow the major branches on this plant family tree. We're going to start way back at the beginning with the absolute simplest forms and work our way up to the complex plants that dominate the world today. So meet the algae. These are the aquatic ancestors from which all land plants evolved. They have a really simple body plan. It's called a thallus, which basically means it's not divided up into true roots, stems, or leaves. They were perfectly adapted for life in the water, but this simple structure was just not going to cut it on land. And algae isn't just one thing. There's a huge amount of diversity here, often classified by color. You've got your green, brown, and red algae, and they all use different pigments to capture sunlight and store energy in different ways. But out of all of them, it was the green algae lineage that held the key. They were the direct ancestors of every land plant to come. This brings us to the first group to make the jump, the bryophytes. This includes mosses and liverworts, and they are perfectly described as the amphibians of the plant kingdom. Just like an amphibian, they can live on land, but they are still fundamentally tied to the water. This liverwort here shows their strategy perfectly. Bryophytes like it are small, and they have to hug the ground in damp, shady places. They have to. It's because they still rely on a film of water for reproduction, so their gametes can swim to each other. They took a brave first step onto land, but their life cycle kept them tethered right to the water's edge. So to truly conquer the land, plants needed to solve two huge problems: how to grow tall and get water when you're not in it, and how to reproduce without needing that film of water. This next phase of our story is all about inventing the tools to do just that. The next evolutionary leap came from the Pteridophytes. You probably know them as ferns. And just look at the difference. Compared to the simple ground-hugging bryophytes, these guys were a structural revolution. They developed true roots, stems, and leaves, which finally allowed them to grow upright. And this was all made possible by one key invention. And that invention was vascular tissue. Think of it as internal plumbing. Pteridophytes were the first plants to have it. Xylem to transport water up, and phloem to transport food down. This was a total game changer. It gave them the support to grow tall, compete for sunlight, and freed them from having to live right on top of their water source. But even with this incredible plumbing, ferns and their relatives still faced the exact same reproductive problem as the mosses. They still needed water for fertilization. Solving this final puzzle was the key to unlocking the entire rest of the continent for plant life. And the solution was pure genius: the seed. You can think of a seed as a tiny, self-contained survival kit for a plant embryo. It comes with its own packed lunch, a food supply, and a tough protective coat. And most importantly, the whole process no longer requires swimming parts. This one innovation broke the final chain that tied plants to the water.
The first plants to develop this amazing technology were the Gymnosperms. The name literally means naked seed because their seeds develop right out in the open, like on the scales of a pine cone. This group, which includes all the conifers like pines and firs, was finally able to spread across vast, dry landscapes, and they formed the first great forests on our planet.
Now, Gymnosperms were a huge success, but one final evolutionary masterpiece was about to appear. An innovation so successful it would lead to the group of plants that make up nearly 90% of all plant species on Earth today. That secret weapon was the flower. The arrival of Angiosperms, or flowering plants, led to such a rapid and massive explosion of diversity that Charles Darwin famously called it an abominable mystery. So what made the flower so powerful?
The crucial advantage was partnership. Instead of just relying on the wind to spread pollen, flowers evolved to recruit animals, insects, birds, bats, to do the job for them. By offering a reward of nectar, they turned these animals into super-efficient, targeted pollen delivery services. This strategy was wildly successful, and it sparked a co-evolutionary explosion of both plant and animal life.
And this wildly successful strategy allowed angiosperms to diversify into the two major classes we see today, monocots and dicots. They developed different blueprints for their seeds, leaves, and roots, which just showcases the incredible range of forms that could evolve from that single brilliant innovation of the flower.
So when you look at the whole story, from simple algae in the water, to mosses clinging to damp rocks, to the first vascular ferns, to the seed-bearing conifers, and finally to the explosive diversity of flowering plants, it's a true evolutionary epic. Plants didn't just adapt to the world, they engineered it. They created the soils, the atmosphere, and the food that allows for all the complexity of life we see today. And it really makes you wonder, what evolutionary tricks do they still have up their sleeve?